Welcome back. This is Mrryanmcmahon. I'm going to be reading the final installment of Encounters with the Nagual by Armando Torres. This is the last chapter. So now, anyone out there can just go through the entire book, the whole audiobook, one section at a time. So please enjoy, please share, and thanks for listening. Armando Torres, Encounters with the Nagual, the task of the seers of today. Upon verifying the rule of the three-pronged Nagual, Don Juan deduced that inevitably the time of a new breed of warriors was at hand. I have called them to the modern seers. Are there any peculiarities in the luminous composition of those warriors? I asked. No. In every era, man's energy pattern has been very homogeneous. So, the organization of the party is the same. However, the warriors of today are experiencing a slide towards green in their luminosity, which means that they are recovering characteristics of the old seers. This is something unforeseen, although it is for sure covered by the rule. The true difference between seers of the past and those of today is in their behavior. At the moment, we are not subjected to the same repressions as the previous eras, and therefore sorcerers have fewer restrictions. Clearly, this has a purpose: popularization of the teaching. I have lived a moment of renewal. My task is to close the lineage of Don Juan with a golden key, and to open up a possibility for those who come later. This is why I have said that I am the last Nagual of my lineage, not in an absolute sense, but in the sense of radical change. At this point, Carlos took a break in his presentation and reminded me of a conversation we had when we first met. At that time, I had asked him to tell me tales of power. He replied that he could not refuse what I was asking, but to hand over those stories without any direction would have been to trivialize them. I hope that and what you have seen during these years fulfill your expectations. I did what I could considering your limitation as well as mine. I know you have already begun to train your dreaming double, and that guarantees that you can continue by yourself. Your double won't leave you alone until you arrive at your totality. The theoretical part is finished, and it is this time to give you the last gift. The tone of Carlos's voice as he spoke these words, somewhere between familiar and solemn, made me concentrate all of my attention. The final teaching says that in connection with intent, every person, whoever it may be, who approaches the Nagual has his place inside of the total context of the rule. So you are not alone. Sorcerers are all expecting something from you. What? I asked, a little confused. He explained, all warriors have a task. Yours is to fulfill what the Spirit told you to do. That is your path to power. And what is that task? I asked. Well, your personal mission is something your benefactor will communicate to you someday. However, in accordance with the rule of the three-pronged Nagual, I am following a long-term strategy devised by Don Juan, which commits you to my teacher's intent. What is expected from you is that you say to those who surround you, you are free. You can fly by yourselves. You have the necessary information. What are you waiting for? Act impeccably and see how energy finds a way. Warn everyone that with the culmination of Don Juan's lineage, the knowledge is wide open. Each warrior is responsible for himself and can provide himself with the minimum opportunity, which is to organize his own party. With the permission of the one who has no name, I proceed with my testimony to complete this account and present the truth in its entirety. One day, very early in the morning, a phone call woke me up. It was Carlos, and, frankly, he sounded bad. He said that he was in a hotel called Hotel Camino Real in Mexico City, and that he was very sick. He added that he had been unable to sleep that night, and had waited until dawn so that he could call me. I asked him how I could help him. He replied that he urgently needed a particular medicine specifically prepared for him by a herbalist in a town nearby, and asked if I would go there to get it for him. I was at his command. He gave me directions and the name of the person who would have the potion. At that point, he made a comment which seemed odd, since it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. It seemed very odd. When Hernan Cortez arrived in Mexico, he gave the order to burn his ships. That was a magical act which guaranteed victory. For him, it meant he had to win or perish. He had no other option. We should bear in mind that any undertaking could be our last. He went on to say that he had a bad stomach ache and those plants were the only thing in the world that could alleviate his pain. I didn't hesitate. Hanging up the phone, I was already on my way to Tepoztlan, a picturesque town clinging to the mountainside, an hour's bus ride from Mexico City. My intention was to return with the package as soon as possible to help Carlos with his pain. Today, the perspective I have gained after all these years, I understand what he meant when he said that any undertaking could be our last. I got off the bus and went directly to the market. Walking down the street, I could not stop marveling at the beauty of the landscape. High up in the hill above the town, one could see the pyramid of Tepozteco. It was a sunny day, and it took me just a few minutes to gel to the center of town. In the market, I looked for the herbs section and asked for Don Eladio. Nobody seemed to know him, or maybe they didn't want to answer my questions. I stood there without knowing what to do, until a middle-aged gentleman with indigenous features, dressed in a white shirt with a straw hat and sandals, asked me how he could help me. I replied I was looking for Don Eladio, the herbalist, on my behalf of Mr. Jose A. Cortez. His face lit up with a great smile, and he extended his hand to greet me and told me that he was the man, Eladio Zamora, and that he was at my service. I told him that I had come for medicine he had ordered. He seemed not to know what I meant, but when I told him Mr. Jose Cortez was suffering from a strong stomachache, he reacted as if he had remembered something. In a dramatic tone, he told me that he knew what it was about, but that unfortunately he had been unable to gather the herb in question and didn't have it available at the moment to prepare for the beverage. I was alarmed, since I knew what happened to those who failed in some task which Carlos had given them. They were simply discarded. I asked the man if I could get the plant somewhere else. He shook his head. It is useless to look for it. Nobody sells it here. I insisted that there must be some place where I could find it. Seeing my despair, he told me that he could not go and get it at this moment, but maybe if I come back on the weekend. I became very nervous, and I told him that he would describe the plant to me and the place where it grew, and I was willing to go and look for it on my own, to enable him to prepare the medicine. Upon seeing my determination, Don Eladio consented, but warned me that getting to the plant where the plant grew was tiring and dangerous. I am willing to do anything, I exclaimed. He seemed to appreciate my words because he brought out an old botany book, and after leafing through the pages, he knew and showed me a drawing of the plant. He said that the only place where it grew was in the narrow canyon among the hills a good distance away, and explained how to get there. I calculated that it would take me a couple of hours to reach the place, so I said goodbye immediately and was on my way. The beauty of those places is overwhelming. I was filled with a joy and a thought that warriors of ancient ages once traveled along these barren paths 1,000 years ago. The hill was further away than it had seemed. When I came to the narrow canyon, I entered it as best I could among the tall grasses which were growing everywhere. The place in question is formed by the junction of two hills, where the water from most recent rains accumulates and scatters puddles and flows it in a slow, lazy stream. I looked for the plant a long time. I finally found it, but I was bent down to pick it up, and a strong blow hit me on the head, and I lost consciousness. A penetrating scent woke me up. I was lying on a mat on top of a pile of herbs. I looked around and discovered that I was in a rustic cabin. The floor was stamped earth, and wooden beams, darkened by smoke, supported the tile roof. Near a clay oven was a fire burning, and sat an old woman dressed in Indian clothes. I noticed that her skin was white. Seeing that I was awake, she smiled and said, "Well, I'll be damned. Welcome back to the land of the living. For a while there, I thought you were fucked." I didn't know what to say. I tried to move and felt searing pain in my head. My whole body ached. The old lady hurried closer to me and in an urgent voice ordered me not to move, since I was only alive by a miracle. Judging by the pain, I could well believe my condition was serious, and did as she told me. I asked her what had happened to me. She replied that she didn't know. She thought that I had been attacked by robbers who had beaten me up and left me for dead in the hills. Pointing at the clothes I was wearing, she said I was naked when she found me. At that moment, I realized that I was dressed in a white robe embroidered with hummingbirds, like the ones indigenous women use. The old lady introduced herself. She told me her name was Sylvia Magdalena, and she was a devoted herbalist, and she was healing my injuries. She remarked that it was a stroke of luck that she had found me, lying as if thrown there in the path, bleeding and almost dead. She added that I had already spent 3 days unconscious, and that in a couple of days I could get up. Her words startled me. I wanted to get up again, but I was so weak that I fell back on the mat. I told her how shocked I was by what she had told me, and in the moaning voice explained how I had come there in search of herbs for a friend, but that I had failed in my task, and because of that, I would surely never see him again. Listening to my complaining, she started to laugh. I didn't understand why. She seemed confused and showed confusing expressions. She said, "Don't mind me. I'm just given to fits of laughter." The following days were the strangest of my life. Every day, I had the opportunity to study how Don Sylvia cured her patients, who were suffering from all kinds of illnesses. When I began to recover a little from my injuries, she asked me to help her. In that way, without realizing it, I began working as a healer. In time, I learned everything connected to the art. She taught me how to clean people's energy and to make cures for various kinds of illnesses, as well as a lot of chiropractic techniques and an immense number of tea recipes. I soon understood that Don Sylvia Magdalena was a witch, and that I had been taken on as her pupil. The simple fact of being near her was a true delight for me. The humor and the drama in everything she did was magnificent, and they reminded me of Carlos's descriptions of his teachers. I spent almost 3 months on that mat. The most difficult part was in the beginning, when I could not move, and the healer's assistants had to come and take me to the bathroom. That bathroom was outside the house and didn't make the situation any easier. One day, when I was much better, Don Sylvia told me that at the next full moon, there would be an initiation ceremony for me. I had already learned much of her world, and I accepted the invitation as a true honor. She added, "All I can say is that those who participate in these ceremonies are changed forever, and they can never be the same again. There is no return." As usual, I didn't understand what she meant. She always used strange expressions. It was around 9 in the evening when she asked me to come with her. I walked in the darkness for nearly an hour until we arrived at a place where some people sat around a bonfire. When we came closer, she made a gesture indicating that I should sit down on a particular rock. The place of that meeting was near a waterfall. I could hear the roar of it and felt a humid air wafting up to where we were. The fire gave enough light to see in other groups and other participants. It was a group of 15 people, most of them young, although there were some old ones like Don Sylvia. I felt a little uncomfortable and apart, but because it seemed that I was the only new one present. I had never been to a ceremony of this kind. I didn't know how to proceed or what was in store. This made me very apprehensive. The participants solemnly chanted something that I could not understand, but it filled me with an indefinable yearning. We waited for a while, and then a man appeared out of the darkness, dressed in the skin of a coyote. He approached the fire, dancing in a weird way. He wore the animal's head as a mask, and so I could not see his face. From his mannerisms and movements, I immediately understood that he was a sorcerer. Without saying a word, the man came up to me. With a very skilled gesture, he grabbed my left hand and pressed it against his side with his arm while turning around. I felt a sharp pain between my fingers and wanted to retract my hand, but he held it in a strong grip. When he released, I saw that he had made a cut between the middle ring finger. Blood was flowing freely from the cut. I was shocked. I would have run away if I hadn't been paralyzed by terror. Then the sorcerer squeezed my hand, to force out more blood, and poured a little on the ground, some on the fire, and the rest in a clay vessel. Next, he ordered me to get up and take off my clothes and clean my eyes and keep my eyes closed. There was such a force and an authority in his words that I obeyed. For a long time, the sorcerer prayed and sang around me. I felt him blowing on me and rubbing fragrant herbs all over my body. Finally, he cleansed me with a fire and a torch or something like that. At one point, I felt a hot and viscous substance being spilled on my head. I was intensely curious, but I didn't dare disobey him. Finally, he ordered me to open my eyes. What a shock. My body was covered with blood. On a rock in front of me, I saw the headless body of a small black male goat. I wanted to protest, but the solemnity of the situation stopped me. Then they told me to go and clean myself, so I did. I walked nude in front of them and went to the waterfall. The water was cold, but my body was burning hot, and the cold water felt very good while I was washed away, the red blood covering my body. When I came out of the water, somebody was waiting for me with a towel so I could dry myself off. They gave me the clothes, and I got dressed. Still stunned by the expected events, then I returned to take my place by the fire. Just as I sat down, those gathered in the circle began to pass around some baskets filled with peyote buttons. Each one took a button and passed the basket to the left. I thought about refusing it, but there was no reason to. I had already made my decision. So I said to myself, so what? And surrendered joyfully to the participation in the ceremony. We were eating peyote and singing for most of the night. At one point, when the effect of the plant had begun to fade, the sorcerer came up to me, stopped in front of me, took off the mask. I almost fainted with fear. I could have sworn he was the same ghost that I had seen in the crypt of the cathedral. A chill ran down my back, and I wanted to scream, but the sorcerer spoke to me in a strange voice. It was very rough and dry somehow. He told me that his name was Mrryanmcmahon, and that I was welcome among them. I didn't know what to answer. I just nodded. I was in a very special state of awareness, and the clarity that I enjoyed at that moment was not customary for me in my daily life. Near dawn, the assistants made an enormous spiral with embers from the fire. Don Melchior came to me and told me I should look at the spiral until Holexoko, which is a word for the devil, revealed himself to me. With growing apprehension, I did what he bade me to do, saying to myself that all this was merely symbolic. But after a moment of staring at the embers, I became dizzy and felt if I was falling through a tunnel towards a total blackness where I could no longer recognize myself as me. Since that night, I have never returned to the world I came from. I understand now everything that has happened to me, and I am thankful for my fabulous good luck, which brought me to these magnificent beings who are my teacher and my benefactor. This concludes Encounters with the Nagual by Armando Torres. Please share.